Smith, and I'm going to be explaining a lesson plan for my elementary science methods class at the University of Houston, Victoria. This lesson plan you would teach it can be used for kindergarten through second grade, but I'm going to be using it for adapted to first grade class. This lesson plan is about classifying buttons. We're going to talk about properties of buttons, and then the students will get a chance to group the buttons and classify them. So I have bags of buttons. I have two right here, but you'll have one for however many kids are in your class. You'll have them work in cooperative groups, so about 4 kids per group would probably be best. Each group will get a bag of buttons and like a cookie sheet or like a lunch tray, something that they can dump the buttons out on and they're not going to fall all over the table. So group your kids, get their kids in your groups, and then before you teach this lesson, the kids have to be already familiar with the term property. And a property is a characteristic that you can observe with the senses. You know, touch, feel, sight. So the kids get in groups, to get a bag of buttons, have them dump out the buttons, have them look through the buttons, call on kids and have them call out some of the properties. Like a property of some of these buttons is, this one has 4 holes, it's red or pink. You know, this is not round, that's property. And this button has 2 holes, that's property. Once the kids have become familiar with their buttons and the properties of their buttons, then have them make groups and classify their buttons. So first show them an example. Say, okay, I'm going to classify my buttons, all the pink buttons together. So I can make a group with pink buttons. And they don't have to be the same shape or size, they're just all pink. And then have the kids do it. And they work in their groups, and you know, they can have a group of all the small buttons with 4 holes. And you know, then all the big buttons. So they're becoming familiar with the properties of the buttons. While the kids are working, you're going to be walking around the classroom and asking them questions. You know, why did you group your buttons like that? How are your buttons alike? How are your buttons different? Once they've got all their buttons sorted, then you'll ask them, okay, you've grouped your buttons like this. Which do you think there's the best way to group your buttons? Did somebody choose the right way to group the buttons? And through discussion, you lead the children to the conclusion that there is no right way to classify the buttons. Any kind of object can be classified any way as long as the sorter can say why they did it that way. As long as they can explain it, then that's perfectly okay. Once they're familiar with, they've classified them by one property, like all red, all big, all with 4 holes, then they can have them classify them by 2 properties. So I have a group of pink buttons, pinkish red buttons, and then I'm going to classify them by 2 holes and 4 holes. So all these buttons have 2 holes and these buttons have 4 holes. So first I classified them by color, pink, then I classified them by number of holes, 4 and 2. Then you can have the students go to another cooperative group, like have 2 groups to come together, and have one group look at the other group's buttons. And see if they can figure out how that group classified those buttons. And if they've done a single property and a triple property, see if anybody can figure out how to triple classify them. This was first grade, so probably not. You'll probably be just 2 properties. And once your class has had a chance to look at each other's classification groups, then you need to start asking them questions like, why do we have classification? What was this purpose? What was the purpose of classification? Scientists classify things. They classify animals, leaves, minerals, objects, and through discussion you lead your students to the conclusion that scientists use classification to simplify the thinking process. Instead of focusing on singular items, you can classify them into more easily manageable groups. Students, they know about properties of buttons. They know how to classify them by single and double classify them. So now you're going to have them practice their classification skills. So they're going to play button bingo. And these are bingo cards that I made up on the computer. And some of them just have one property, blue, and then some of them have 2 properties, black with 2 holes. So what you would do would be make sure every kid has a bingo card. Then you get a bag of buttons and you pull one out. This one's white with 2 holes. So you would call on a student and have them tell you what some of the properties of this button are. Then you'll give them out little bingo markers, and if they know this button is white with 2 holes and it's round, then they could mark off round. They could cross off that on their bingo card. And then you keep going, and as you're doing this, you're walking around the classroom, you're observing your students, seeing which students seem to understand this, which students are having trouble, and helping students. This isn't a formal assessment. This is just an informal game for them to practice. Once they've played this game, you can play till, somebody has a diagonal or a bingo, and then maybe have the winner gets a stamp or a little prize. And then, now that they've practiced, you can do your formal assessment. And the way you would do a formal assessment for the first graders would be you would take a picture, get a camera and take a picture of different groupings of buttons. Round buttons, how they're classified in different groups. Then you can put them up on the computer screen or on the Elmo board, and number them. And then the students, you can have a picture of number 1, the groupings. And the students will all write down number 1 and write down how those buttons were classified. You have their round buttons, you have a group of round buttons and not round buttons. So they would write down round and not round. And for first grade, most of the groupings would be single properties, but then you would also have double groupings, and then they would have to write that out. And then if your students have trouble with their writing skills, or some of your English language learners, then you could just have them explain it to you orally. And for them to, you can use the informal assessment of the bingo game, and then the formal assessment of them labeling the pictures as a way to assess if you've met your objective. And the objective of this lesson was for students to be able to describe and classify buttons by their properties.